The hammering of Station Verathul smelled like something between rain and copper wire, and Declan Marsh had gotten used to it in exactly the same way a man gets used to a persistent ringing in one ear, not by forgetting it, but by learning to hear everything else underneath it. He was the only human on the station. He'd been the only human on the station for 4 months, 3 weeks, and he checked the battered chronometer bolted to the wall above his bunk, 11 hours. The assignment was simple: liaison officer, posted to a joint survey platform in the Verath system, while the Confederation and the Galactic Survey collective negotiated terms for a shared mapping initiative of the outer spiral arm. He was the face of humanity. He was also, as best he could tell, the least interesting person aboard. There were 42 species represented on Verathul. Declan had made passable first contact with 37 of them, which mostly meant nodding in the right direction, learning which sounds meant greeting versus threat assessment, and committing to memory which species found eye contact rude, which found it mandatory, and which had no eyes to make contact with. He'd been headbutted by a thorn walker who considered it an honor. He'd been serenaded by a malodrift who communicated entirely through sustained harmonic tones. He'd eaten something small and orange at a communal table, and then spent 12 hours in the medbay while the station's physician, a 4-armed Kressel named Dr. Vaughn, patiently explained that not everything that looked like food was food. He was getting by. His days had a structure which helped. Morning watch, file the overnight comms traffic, update the integration log, cross-reference any new intelligence from the Confederation's survey teams mapping the outer spiral arm. The survey teams were 3 months ahead of him and reported finding exactly what the collective's probes had already found, which meant the negotiation he was here to facilitate was proceeding at the pace of all negotiations, which was to say slowly, and with an elaborate series of misunderstandings at every stage that were ultimately resolved by the quality of the catering. Second watch, rounds. He'd been making rounds of the station with the same methodical attention he would have given a foreign city, learning the streets, the neighborhoods, the rhythms of different districts at different hours. He knew which sections the Thornwalkers preferred and which routes the grain researchers used between their lab spaces and the main ring. He knew that the Malodrift population on the station gathered at a particular junction node late in the second watch to exchange tones, and that if you stood near but not in the flow of traffic at that junction, you could feel the resonance in the floor for about 10 seconds before the herd dispersed. He had done this 17 times. He intended to keep doing it. Third watch, observation deck. That was the structure that had held him for 4 months, 3 weeks and 11 hours. It was sufficient. It was, if he was being precise about it, more than he had expected from a posting that the Confederation coordinator had described as routine liaison integration, minimal interface requirements, strong opportunity for independent cultural observation. What he'd learned, above almost everything else, was that the universe was extraordinarily indifferent to his comfort and extraordinarily rich in everything else. He was at the observation deck when he first saw them. The observation deck was his place. Not officially, there was nothing official about a junior liaison officer claiming a public platform, but in practice, no one else came there at the third watch, when the station's artificial day cycle dimmed to dark blue and most species retreated to rest. He came because the outer spiral arm looked like the inside of a cathedral, and no one had ever told him you weren't supposed to kneel in it. He'd been staring at a cluster of stars that had no name in any human catalog when the door behind him slid open and 2 figures stepped through. He almost didn't look. He assumed it was another Malodrift, or possibly the elderly grain researcher who occasionally wandered in during off hours to calibrate instruments and hum to herself. Instead, he turned and found himself looking at 2 women who were absolutely, unmistakably not any species he had catalogued. They were tall not grotesquely, not in the way of the Thornwalkers who had to duck through bulkheads, but tall in the way of something that had grown without restriction, like trees with good soil. Their skin held a quality he couldn't immediately name, somewhere between pearl and the surface of still water at dusk, faintly luminous at the edges where the dim blue of the watch cycle light touched them. Their hair was dark and fell straight, and their faces were symmetrical. Profoundly, mathematically symmetrical, in a way that made his brain keep trying to confirm it, like an optical illusion that wouldn't resolve. They were identical. They stopped when they saw him. He stood up from the bench where he'd been sitting. No one said anything for a moment that stretched like taffy. One of them, the one standing slightly closer to the center of the room, made a sound in the back of her throat. Not a word, a register, something in a frequency his translator implant was clearly working to process. Human, his implant finally delivered in its careful neutral tone. You are the human. That's yes, he said. Declan Marsh. Liaison Human Confederation. I'm sorry, I don't know your designation. They looked at each other. Not quickly, the way people do when they're checking a reaction slowly, the way people do when they are saying something. Verathul's designation for us is Vale Twin, said the first one. The designation is not preferred. We are Sale and Vel, said the second. Her voice had a different texture to it, lower and less measured. I am Vel. I'm pleased to meet you both, he said, and meant it, even though he had no idea what he was looking at, and even though there was something about the way they'd been standing when they came in, careful, like people who were holding themselves at a certain tension, that made the back of his neck register as significant. We were not told a human was assigned here, Sale said. I was posted 4 months ago. He almost said I've been making the rounds, but that felt glib, learning the station. You have not come to the Eastern Ring, Vel said. I didn't know there was an Eastern Ring. They looked at each other again, that slow, private exchange. There is, said Sale. It is where we live. It is where our people observe the departure rite. She said the last 2 words with the careful emphasis of someone who knows they're translating imperfectly. We have come to the observation deck because it faces the correct stellar formation. Our rite requires it. I can leave, he said immediately. This isn't my space. I don't want to intrude on. You are not intruding, Vel said, and there was something in her voice on those 4 words that was harder to read than anything his implant had delivered to him in 4 months on the station. You may stay, if you are quiet. He sat back down. They stood at the far edge of the observation platform, facing the glass, and they were quiet for a very long time. He watched them without staring, the practiced art of a liaison officer, attention without intrusion. He noticed that they stood with their shoulders almost touching. He noticed that Vel's hands were clasped in front of her, and that Sale's hands hung open at her sides, and that periodically, as if drawn by gravity, Sale's right hand would brush Vel's left without either of them seeming to decide it. He noticed that Vel was not looking at the stars. She was looking at the reflection in the observation glass, looking at him. He looked back carefully at the reflection. Neither of them moved. After a time Sale spoke. You watch without asking, most species ask. I find it's better to watch first, he said. You learn more. What have you learned? He considered. That you're here for something that matters to you, that it's complicated, that you're not sure what to make of me being here, but you decided it was all right. Silence. You are observant, Sale said, for a human. We get that a lot, he said. Vel made a sound. He wasn't certain, but he thought it might have been a laugh or what passed for one. It came from somewhere in the chest, brief and compressed, like something escaping through a small gap. They left before the watch cycle ended. They didn't say goodbye in any format he recognized. They simply turned and walked out, and the door slid shut, and Declan sat with the stars and thought about reflection. He went back the next night. During the hours between, he sat in the liaison office, a narrow room that smelled of recycled air and the particular kind of silence that belongs to spaces not often used, and tried to file his weekly activity report. The form asked, among other things, for significant interspecies contacts during the reporting period. He stared at the question for a long time. He typed, "Third watch contact with Veiled Twin cohort members in the observation deck. Preliminary cultural exchange. Departure right observance in progress." Then he deleted most of that and wrote, "Routine station integration. Continued species orientation work." He didn't file it yet. He spent part of the afternoon in the station's communal meal hall, which operated on a rotational schedule designed to accommodate the dietary needs of 42 species simultaneously, which was a logistics challenge that someone had solved with considerable ingenuity. He usually sat in the section designated for carbon-based metabolisms and ate whatever was warm and identifiable, and watched the other species eat, because he had found that eating was one of the most culturally informative things you could observe in a species. How people ate told you something more fundamental than how they spoke. He was working through something that was approximately grain with a sauce that was approximately savory when he noticed Vel across the hall. She was at a table in a section he'd never paid attention to before, eating alone, with a data tablet propped against a container, and her attention split between the screen and the food in a way that looked habitual, like someone who had long since stopped expecting company for meals. Her posture was impeccable. That was a thing he'd noticed the night before, too. Both of them held themselves with an exactness that wasn't stiffness, more like the absence of unnecessary motion. Like people who had learned to take up exactly the space they needed, and no more. She hadn't seen him, or if she had chosen not to acknowledge it, which was also possible. He ate his grain and his approximate sauce, and he did not cross the hall. He was a liaison officer. He understood the difference between contact that was welcome and contact that was an intrusion, and he had not yet calibrated where, in the daylight hours, the boundary was. But he watched her read, and he watched her eat small, precise motions, without hurry, and he noticed that she turned one page of whatever was on the tablet, and then went back and turned it again, which he recognized as the universal gesture of not quite being able to hold on to what you're reading because something else has more weight. He understood that too. He hadn't planned to, or rather, he'd planned not to, the way you plan not to go somewhere you very much want to go, which is to say not at all convincingly. He arrived at the observation deck at the beginning of the third watch with a cup of something hot that wasn't coffee, but served the same psychological function, and sat down in the same spot, and watched the outer spiral arm do nothing in particular. They came 40 minutes later. "You returned," said Vel. "It's a public space," he said, "unless—" "It is a public space," said Sale. "We did not expect you to return." "Did you want me to not return?" The exchange again, slower this time. "No," said Vel, "we did not want that." He nodded. He held out the container toward them, a gesture that was purely instinctive and immediately felt stupid. "I only have one cup. It's a hot drink. It's not coffee, the station doesn't carry it, but it's warm and it has some kind of—" He stopped. "I'm offering to share. That's the gesture." Vel looked at the container for a moment. She crossed to him, which was 3 steps, and took it. She smelled it. She looked at Sale. She took a small sip and considered for a moment, the way people do when they're trying to locate exactly what they're tasting, and then she returned it to him without comment. He took it back. "That could mean almost anything," he said. "Good, bad, indifferent." "It is strange," said Vel. "Not bad, strange and warm." "That's the most honest review I've received all year." Sale sat, not next to him at the far end of the bench with significant space between them, but on the bench. He noted that her hands were in her lap this time. He noted that the tension he'd registered the night before was still present, but differently arranged. "May I ask what the departure right is?" he said. "You don't have to tell me." A long pause. It is the farewell, Sale said. For a people leaving a place, we are, she stopped. Our cohort, our family unit. There are 8 of us in the Eastern Ring. We have been posted here for 2 of your years. We leave in 6 days. The departure rite is observed on the last 7 nights before leaving. We watch the stellar formation from which our species' oldest narratives say we came. Where you're going home to, he said. We are going home, she confirmed. Yes. He looked at the glass, at the stars. And that's, he chose his words carefully, that's a good thing going home. Sale and Vel were quiet for such a long time that he thought he'd misstepped, asked something he shouldn't have. It is the correct thing, Vel said finally. Whether it is a good thing requires more precision than the word allows. He sat with that. I understand that feeling pretty well, actually. Vel looked at him, not at his reflection this time, at him directly, which he noted. You are far from your home, she said. 4 months, he said. Not that far in terms of posting, but yes. Is it difficult? Sometimes. He turned the container in his hands. Mostly it's interesting, occasionally it's lonely, but the interesting usually wins. You are alone here, she said. There are no other humans. No, he agreed. Does that not? She stopped. She said something to Sale in their native language, outside his implant's range. She is asking, Sale said, with a quality that might have been either amusement or concern, whether the aloneness frightens you. He thought about it honestly. In the abstract, he said, not in the practical. In practice, I've been too busy learning which end of a grain to approach without getting fluid on my uniform to have time to be frightened. Vel made the compressed sound again, definitely a laugh. Sale did not laugh, but something in the set of her shoulders shifted. We are also alone, she said, in a way that does not have a clean translation. Our species bonds in pairs. We are a bonded pair. But our greater family are people they are. She stopped again. Vel said something sharp and quiet in their language. Sale was silent for a moment. They do not approve, she said, of the bond of us. There are, she looked at her hands, there are bonds that are permitted and bonds that are not. Ours is, a pause so precise it felt surgical. Our bond is not the kind our people approve of. He did not look away from the stars. He did not make it a thing. And you're going back to them, he said. We are going back, Vel confirmed. Her voice was the flattest it had been. In 6 days. He turned the container in his hands twice more. I'm sorry, he said. That's a hard kind of homecoming. Neither of them said anything for a while. The right, said Sale finally, is also for that. For, she selected the word like she was picking something up that might cut her, for what cannot be changed. It is not only a farewell to a place, it is a farewell to what was allowed here that will not be allowed there. He looked at her, she was looking at the glass, at the stars, not at him. He understood then what the tension was. He'd catalogued it wrong. It wasn't the tension of people who weren't sure what to make of him. It was the tension of people who were made of a specific kind of grief, and had learned to carry it so carefully that it had become invisible until a window in the dark caught it at the right angle. He recognized it. He'd seen it on his mother's face, years ago, standing at a kitchen window looking at nothing in particular, 6 weeks before she died. That quality of a person who has looked clearly at what is coming and made a peace with it that is not peace but something that wears peace as a costume, because the alternative is to make everyone else carry it too. Is there something you can do, he asked, to stay, some kind of? No, said Vel, simply without rancor. The word of someone who had already exhausted every direction that question could go. There is not. He nodded. He did not argue with it. They sat together in the observation deck for another 2 hours. They did not talk much. He pointed out a stellar cluster that his species astronomers had named Meridian's Hook, named for a navigator from 5 centuries back who had used it to cross a particularly bad stretch of open water, which Sale found baffling and Vel found charming. Vel asked him what music was. Not the concept, she understood the concept, but what it was to him, personally, and he ended up trying to describe his mother's voice singing something from her own childhood, in a language he'd never spoken but had learned to understand purely through the medium of her singing it. It took him longer than he expected. He started with the technical, vibration, frequency, the organized arrangement of sound into patterns that the human brain had co-evolved with over tens of thousands of years, so thoroughly that music and language and emotion and memory had become essentially the same neural system wearing different hats. He told them that humans who lost the ability to form new memories could still learn songs. He told them that humans under extreme stress, combat, catastrophe, the bad hours of long illnesses, frequently found themselves humming without deciding to. That the body reached for music when language ran out. Sale found this immediately comprehensible. A regulatory system, she said, parallel to the right. Yes, he said. Probably. But Vel was still looking at him, with the expression of someone waiting for the answer to a different question. You said your mother's voice, she said. He paused, yes. Tell me about that. He looked at the stars. He turned the cup in his hands. She was from a region of Earth with a long oral tradition, he said. Older than writing. Songs that had been passed down through enough generations that no one knew exactly where they started. She would sing them when she was working, when she was cooking, when she drove. She didn't perform them, they were just something she did, the way some people think out loud except she thought in music. Did you understand the language? No, not as a spoken thing, but he stopped. But I understood the songs. Because I grew up inside them. The words were shapes to me. I knew them by sound and rhythm, and the way her face changed during the ones that were sad versus the ones that were fierce versus the ones that were, he paused. The ones that were for loving something. Vel was very still. When she died, he said carefully, I found that I could still hear them. The songs, they didn't, he cleared his throat. They didn't go anywhere, they were still there. I don't know if that's a comfort or a haunting. Probably it's both. Vel said, bittersweet. He looked at her. You taught us that word last night, she said. I did not expect to use it so quickly. He laughed genuinely. It surprised him a little. No, he said. I didn't expect that either. Sale was watching them with an expression he couldn't fully read, but which he had begun to associate with the specific look of someone who is very glad about something, and is choosing to hold it quietly rather than say it. When they left, Vel paused in the doorway. You will come tomorrow, she asked. It wasn't quite a question. Or rather, it was a question that had a specific weight in it, the kind of weight that belongs to someone who is not in the habit of asking for things. Yes, he said. She left. The second night he learned that Sale was a researcher, biological systems, specifically the way organisms adapted sensory perception in low-gravity environments. She had been studying a species of bioluminescent organism in the outer ring of the Verath system, and she talked about it with a precision and fluency that made the organisms sound like old friends. She showed him a data tablet with recordings of the organisms pulsing in sequence. They looked, in the dark of the observation deck, like something between breathing and music. Do they communicate through the light? He asked. In a manner, Sale said, though communicate is perhaps an overstatement, it is more they respond, to each other and to the environment. The patterns are not exactly language. They are more like shared condition, a pulse that says I am here and it is like this. That's beautiful, he said. He meant it without qualification. Sale looked at him with the particular expression of a scientist who has been told their subject is beautiful by a non-specialist and who is deciding whether to be pleased or condescending. She landed on pleased. It is, she said. Most researchers assigned here don't notice. They catalog and quantify. The aesthetic quality of the organism is not within their mandate. What was your mandate? Sensory adaptation in low-gravity environments. She tilted the tablet slightly. I exceeded my mandate significantly. He smiled. The best researchers usually do. She looked at him again, differently this time. You are not what I expected, she said, from human cultural data packages. What were you expecting? She considered this carefully, the way she considered most things. Louder, she said finally, more assertive of your own frame, less willing to receive something on its own terms before assigning it one of yours. Those are fair criticisms of humans in general, he said. I've been working on it. Vel had been listening to this exchange from near the glass. She turned at that. Why, she said. He looked at her. Why what? Why work on it? You are one human. The traits of your species are not, she looked for the word. They are not your failing. No, he agreed, but there's something I can move around. You can't change the gravity of a system you're in, but you can change how you navigate it. He paused. My mother used to say, the way you were made is the place you started, not the place you're going. Vel turned that over. She did this literally in the way of her species, a small movement of the head, as if examining something from a different angle. That is a good way to put it, she said. I have not heard it put that way. Vel was quieter than Sale. She asked more than she told. She asked him about human childhood, what it was like, how long it lasted, whether humans chose their companions or had them assigned by community consensus. She asked him why humans laughed at difficult things. He tried to explain that one for a while and landed on something like, because the alternative was falling apart, and falling apart takes more energy than you have when things are already hard. So you do the small, absurd thing that tricks your body into releasing the pressure. Vel considered that for a long time. That is very efficient, she said finally. Humans are basically highly motivated to survive with minimal structural damage, he said. We've gotten creative about the methods. The right serves the same purpose, said Sale quietly, for us, in a different way. He looked at her. Would you tell me about it, the whole thing, not just the stellar observation part? They did. It took a long time, and it required both of them because certain concepts in one's vocabulary covered gaps in the others, and the translation was imperfect, but the intent was clear. The departure rite, as they described it, was 7 nights of deliberate remembrance. Each night was dedicated to a different kind of acknowledgement. What was found here, what was made here, what was lost here, what was carried forward. The stellar observation was the 5th night. Tonight was the 5th night. What was the first 4 nights? He asked. What was found, said Sale. What was made, what was understood, what was loved. She said the last word carefully, like something she decided to say before she said it. And after this, he said. What is carried forward, said Vel, and what is released? And the 7th. Silence. The 7th is, the name in our language is the morning before morning, said Sale. It is the last night before departure. There is a ceremony, the community gathers. The elder of the cohort, she paused, performs the formal acknowledgement of what cannot follow us home. He understood what she was not saying. He looked at his hands. There's a ceremony, he said, where they formally. The bond is acknowledged, Vel said, and then it is formally. She said a word in their language. His implant gave him 4 possible translations: released, dissolved, set down, made not. Made not, he said. Yes, she said. He sat with that, and you have to be there for the ceremony. We cannot refuse, said Sale. It would be, she said something to Vel. Vel replied. It would be the equivalent of denying our people, our cohort. It would make them carry something they should not carry. The right is as much for them as for us. He thought of his mother's face at the window, of the specific kind of dignity that belongs to someone who is protecting other people from their own grief by absorbing it cleanly. of how that looked from the inside versus how it looked from the outside. "That's very generous," he said, "of you both." "It is not generous," said Vel quietly. "It is what is required." "Sometimes those are the same thing," he said. She looked at him. There was something in her face in that moment that was too specific to be categorized quickly, and he registered it without cataloging it, because cataloging it felt like a reduction. The third night, the sixth night of the right sail, brought something in a container that was roughly the size and shape of a thermos, but made of a material he'd never seen, somewhere between ceramic and dark glass. She poured 2 small cups and placed one in front of him without explanation. He picked it up and smelled it, and it smelled like something between stone and rain. And he drank it, and it tasted like the night observatory deck felt, which was a sensation he would not be able to describe to another human for the rest of his life, but which was exactly right in the moment. "It's extraordinary," he said. "It is for shared sorrow," said Sale. "And shared things that are not quite sorrow. There is a word for it in our language. Your implant will give you grief and also, but that is not accurate." "We have a word," he said. "Bittersweet. It means a thing that is both good and painful at the same time, usually applied to things you want to hold and cannot keep." Sale held the cup for a moment. "Bittersweet," she said, not a question, testing the weight of it. "Yes," he said. "That is the correct word for tonight," she said. They drank. The outer spiral arm was doing what it always did, which was being incomprehensibly large and ancient and scattered with light, and Declan Marsh sat between 2 alien women and felt, acutely, that the universe was both a very large and a very small place, depending on the moment. Vel was at the glass again. She had a habit of standing very close to it, close enough that her breath would have fogged it if her biology worked that way. She stood there looking out and said, without turning around, "Do humans ever choose to stay somewhere, knowing it will end, knowing from the first moment that they cannot keep it?" He thought about it. "Yes," he said, "all the time. A human's favorite things have always had the quality of ending." "That is strange," she said. "It makes the thing more itself," he said, "not less." She was quiet. "Vel," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" She turned from the glass. In the blue watchlight her face was hard to read, but she was looking at him steadily. "You may ask." "Do you know," he chose his words with the care of someone building something that needs to hold weight, "when you go back, when the ceremony is done, will you be—" he stopped, restarted. "Is there a version of a good life on the other side of this, for both of you?" The silence was long enough that he thought he'd crossed a line. Then Sale said quietly, "Our people are not cruel. They are constrained by tradition, by belief, by the architecture of their love, which is real, even when it is also a limitation." She turned the cup in her hands. "We will be assigned other bonds. We will be provided for by the community, by our family unit. We will not suffer in material ways." "But," he said. "But," she agreed. He nodded. He didn't push further. Vel crossed back to the bench. She did not sit at the far end this time. She sat 3 feet from him, which, for the past 3 nights, had been a noticeable reduction. "I would like to tell you something," she said. "It is outside the right. It is not required. I choose to say it." "All right," he said. "When we came to the observation deck 4 nights ago," she said, "I expected to be alone, or to be with species that would not register what the right was. Most species do not register. They see the observance and they do not," she looked for a word. "They do not receive it. They acknowledge it and they continue. She stopped. "Go on," he said. "You were quiet," she said, "in the correct way, not because you were uncomfortable. Because you understood that something was present in the room that deserved to be received quietly. Another stop. "I know," he said. "I did understand that." "How?" said Sale. "You did not know what the right was." "I didn't need to," he said. It was visible, the shape of it, whatever it was." He paused. Humans are very old in terms of grief. We've been doing it for a long time. We recognize it in other shapes. Sale made the compressed sound. Vel did not. Vel was looking at him with an expression that was neither the catalogued alien expressions he'd learned over 4 months nor anything he'd seen on a human face, which meant it was its own thing entirely, and it meant something he was choosing to receive rather than analyze. "Declan Marsh," said Vel. "Yes," he said. "We have one more night," she said. "Tomorrow is the 7th night, the morning before morning. We must be in the Eastern Ring for the ceremony." She was looking at her hands. "We will not be able to come here tomorrow." He felt the shape of that. "I know," he said. "I would like," she looked up. "Tonight, I would like to, there is a practice in some human cultural references of," she said something to Sale. Sale said, "She has been researching humans since the 2nd night." Vel, for the first time, did something that looked remarkably like being embarrassed. "There is a practice," she said, "in some human traditions of sharing a sleeping space in the context of comfort, not in the," she made a small, precise gesture, "not in the procreative or romantic designation. In the context of this," she indicated, with a gesture he couldn't entirely parse, the room and the three of them and what the last 4 nights had been. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at Sale. "You're asking," he said, "if you can stay here tonight." "There is a phrase," Vel said. It was the least composed she'd sounded across any of the nights. "We found it in human archives, particularly in colder climate traditions of your northern continent populations. The linguistic record describes it as." "Is there room for us in your bed, human?" said Sale. Not to him, to Vel. An echo of whatever Vel had found offered gently. Vel said very quietly, "That is the phrase, yes." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only exists between people who have understood each other, imperfectly, and with great effort, across a gap that was never supposed to be bridged. He thought about what they had told him, about the 7th night, about what was coming for them in the Eastern Ring. He thought about what Vel had said, that it made the thing more itself, not less, when it was something you could not keep. He had said that. It was a real thing. "This space has a bench that converts to a sleep platform," he said. "No one comes here in the 3rd watch. It faces the stars." He looked at Sale, at Vel. "Yes," he said, "there is room." What happened after was simple, not remarkable in any dramatic way. Vel and Sale remained in the observation deck, and he moved the bench configuration to its wider setting, which he discovered by accident 2 months ago and never had occasion to use. He sat with his back against the bulkhead. Sale sat at the far end with her legs drawn up, the empty container between them. Vel lay down with her head toward the glass and her eyes open, and the stars moving slowly overhead in the observation windows, and after a time that was neither short nor long, she slept. He had not expected that. He did not move. Sale looked at him across the sleeping form of her sister, her companion, her pair bond, her, whatever word carried the full weight of what they were. "She has not slept in 3 nights, Sale said very quietly. The 6th observance is the hardest for her. She does not release things easily. She holds them." He nodded. He kept his voice low. "She does seem like that kind of person." "She researched humans," Sale said. "That is not a small thing. She does not extend attention without it is not casual for her." He looked at Vel's face, which in sleep was less controlled than it was in waking, and there was nothing to say about that, so he didn't say anything. "May I ask you something?" said Sale. "Yes." "Do you?" She considered her words with the same care Vel usually brought to language, which he now recognized as a trait of the species rather than of the individual. "Is there, in human experience, is there a word for the specific grief of meeting something good and knowing, in the first moment, that the timeline is already set, that you are counting forward and back simultaneously from the instant of meeting?" He thought about it carefully. Not one clean word, he said. We have a phrase, already missing it. Present tense, usually said of something happening right now that you know you will mourn later. Already missing it, she said. She said it in his language, which was the first time she had. Her accent was something he had no framework for. Yes, he said. She looked at Vel. Already missing it, she said again. Not to him, not to anyone. He looked at the stars. At some point, he couldn't name the hour Sale slept too. She didn't lie down. She leaned against the far end of the bulkhead and folded herself in some way that looked structurally impossible but was apparently comfortable, and her eyes closed, and her breathing evened out. Declan Marsh sat between two sleeping alien women in an observation deck at the edge of the outer spiral arm, and the stars did what stars do, which is rotate so slowly that you can only see it if you look away and look back and measure the difference. He did not sleep. Not because he wasn't tired. He was tired, but there was something about the weight of the moment that made sleeping feel like a waste of it. He'd understood, sometime around the second night, that these 7 nights were the shape of something he'd been offered by accident, not by design. Not by any cultural framework or species protocol. By the simple fact that he'd been in the right place at the right time and had the good sense to be quiet about it. He thought about Dr. Vaughn in the mid-bay, explaining patiently that not everything that looks like food is food. He thought about the thorn walker who'd headbutted him and then, weeks later, had gestured at the stars with an arm the size of a small tree and said something his implant had rendered as, "The ones who count things understand more than the ones who name them." He thought about the mallow drift and its sustained harmonic tones and the way, if you sat very still, you could feel the frequency of it in your chest. He thought about a woman standing at a kitchen window 6 weeks before she died, holding a cup that had gone cold, not looking at anything but also looking at exactly the right thing. He thought about the phrase already missing it, and how the present tense was the whole point of it. When Vel woke before sail, and before the watch cycle began its return to daylight, she did not move immediately. She lay looking at the stars for a while. Then she turned her head and looked at him. He was awake, she could see that. He had been awake all night, which she could also see. "You did not sleep," she said. "No," he said. "Why?" He considered, "Because you were." She looked at him for a moment with that expression that was its own category. "That is," she started. "That is a very," she stopped. "Human thing to say," he offered. "I was going to say it is a kind thing," she said, "but yes, it is also that." Sale woke a few minutes later, the way people wake when they've been sleeping lightly, not disoriented, just present. She unfolded from her position against the bulkhead and sat up and looked at the observation window, where the stellar formation was still visible at the edge of the frame, slowly rotating toward the limit of the glass. "Fifth night of the rite," she said. "We watched it." "We did," said Vel. They were quiet together for a few minutes. He did not interrupt it. There was a quality to their shared silence that was habitual, he thought, long practiced. The comfortable shorthand of people who have communicated so thoroughly over so many years that they no longer need to perform the act of communication. Then Vel said, "We should return to the ring." "Yes," said Sale. Neither of them moved immediately. He understood that too. "You have one more night," he said, not to remind them, as an acknowledgement. "Yes," said Vel. "I know I can't come to the ceremony," he said. "It's not my." "No," said Sale, gently, "it is not, but there is a part of the rite that precedes the ceremony, the part called what is carried forward." She looked at her hands. "It is traditionally a time for the individuals departing to make a record of what they encountered in the posting, what changed them, what they wish to acknowledge before the community, before it is formally." She stopped. "Before the morning," said Vel. "Yes," said Sale, "Declan Marsh." She said his name the way his translator implant rendered most alien names carefully, treating it as a significant thing. We would like to record you, in that part of the right, as something encountered, something that changed us, in small ways, in ways that, she looked at Vel. In ways that were good, said Vel simply. He did not know what to say to that. He let the silence hold it for a moment, which felt right. I'd be honored, he said, it was true. They stood. They made the gesture of departure, which, for their species, was a kind of stillness, a deliberate pause before turning, that he had learned over 3 nights to recognize as significant rather than incidental. He held still during it because it seemed to be what was called for. Declan Marsh, said Vel. Yes. What you said, that the ending makes the thing more itself. She looked at him. I believe that, I did not before, now I believe it. He looked at her steadily. I know, he said, I can tell. She turned. She and Sale walked to the door. In the threshold, in the way that she had, Vel paused. Already missing it, she said, in his language, her accent, his words. Already missing it, he confirmed. The door slid shut. He sat in the observation deck for a long time after. The stellar formation rotated at its unhurried pace. The watch cycle moved toward morning. He held the empty container from the night before, the one the stone and drain drink had come in, which they'd left behind. He didn't know whether by accident or intention. He turned it in his hands, the way you turn a thing when you're deciding whether to keep it. He kept it. The 7th night he did not go to the observation deck. He went to the Eastern Ring instead. Not to the ceremony. He had understood clearly that the ceremony was not for him. But the Eastern Ring had a secondary corridor that ran along the outer hull, and the outer hull had 3 windows, and the windows looked out at the same stellar formation as the observation deck, from a slightly different angle. He sat in that corridor for 3 hours. He had brought nothing with him except his uniform and the battered chronometer on his wrist, which he checked twice, and then stopped checking. The corridor smelled different from the rest of the station, something in the ventilation system or the materials of the Eastern Ring's construction, a mineral sharpness that was not unpleasant. The lights were dimmed here to a warm amber, which was lower than the watch cycle lighting and felt deliberate. He understood, after a few minutes, that the dim amber was for the right. That whoever managed the station's environmental controls had accommodated this, quietly and without fanfare. 42 species and the station had learned to hold space for each of them. He sat on the floor with his back against the outer hull and looked at the stellar formation through the window and thought about the 6 nights behind him. He was aware, with the particular precision of someone who has spent time learning to catalog alien behavior, that what had happened across those 6 nights was singular. Not in any romantic or dramatic sense. Nothing had happened that could be easily reported in his weekly activity log or explained to the Confederation liaison coordinator back on Verath Prime. What had happened was simply this. 2 people who were made of grief had, by some accident of timing and placement, let a stranger sit with them while they held it, and the stranger had been able to receive it without flinching, which was rarer than he would have expected. He thought about what Vel had said. That receiving things on their own terms was not what she had expected from a human. He thought about the early postings he'd heard about from older liaison officers, the ones who went in loud and bright and organized the universe according to human frameworks, because that was the only atlas they had and they were afraid to navigate without it. He understood that impulse. He'd felt it, some of those first weeks on Verathul, the pull to make everything legible in his own terms, to name things as a way of managing them. He'd resisted it mostly, because his mother had taught him something he couldn't have articulated until now, sitting in a dim amber corridor on an alien space station, with the sounds of a ceremony for irreversible loss moving through the bulkhead to his left. You can only carry what you're willing to put down first. He'd had to put down a lot of frameworks, A lot of assumptions about what grief looked like and what company meant and what silence was for. He'd done that slowly over 4 months, because the station had required it, and he had complied, because he was good at his job, but also because he had genuinely wanted to know what he was inside of, what this immense and indifferent universe actually held in the spaces between the named things. Sale and Vel were one of the answers to that question. He didn't know exactly when the ceremony was, or how long it lasted. He sat and he watched the stellar formation, and he thought about things that didn't have clean translations in either direction, and he didn't try to make them into words. At some point he heard, through the bulkhead, something that might have been voices and might have been tones, a harmonic resonance that traveled through the hull plating into the floor he was sitting on and up through his bones. It was low and sustained, and it was multiple voices or registers woven together, and it had the quality of something very old being done with great care. Not for the first time and not for the last, a thing that had been done before and would be done again, but that was no less itself for the repetition. He sat with it. He did not analyze it. He received it, the way you receive something that was not meant for you but that you were present for anyway, which is with gratitude and without commentary. He left before anyone came out. The departure was scheduled for the following morning at the beginning of the first watch, when the docking bays were quietest, and the minimum necessary station staff were present to manage the departure protocols. He was on the docking observation level because that was his job, part of what liaison officers did at departures: witness and record and represent. He stood with his chronometer and his tablet and his Confederation insignia, and he watched the 8 members of the Eastern Ring cohort cross the platform with their equipment and their transit cases. They moved differently than they had in the Eastern Ring corridor, or even in the observation deck. There was a precision to them that was new, formal, the way people are formal when they are performing something that must be done correctly, because it is the last of a sequence that must be completed. He'd seen it in humans at memorial services. That specific dignified economy of motion that belongs to people who have done their weeping somewhere else. He had not known, until now, what the other 6 members of the Eastern Ring cohort looked like. He catalogued them quickly: 3 who shared the luminous pearl skin and symmetrical features of Sale and Vel, though their hair colors differed; 2 who were larger, with a different bioluminescent quality at the throat instead of the edges; 1 who was smaller and moved with the deliberate, careful steps of someone whose knees hurt. The elder, he guessed, the one who had performed the ceremony. He watched them cross the platform and file through the boarding passage. He watched Dr. Von stand at the edge of the docking bay to observe. The station physician attended all departures as a matter of protocol. He watched 2 engineering staff in the high observation booth run their pre-departure checklists with the particular focused efficiency of people doing a routine thing. He saw Sale first. She saw him. She did the stillness gesture. He held still. Vel was last. She was carrying something he hadn't seen before, a transit case in the same dark ceramic material as the drink container. She stopped in front of him. She was, in the harsh light of the docking bay, the same as she had been in the blue observatory dark. Something about that was significant to him, that a person looks the same in ordinary light as they do when everything is soft and starlit. "You came," she said. "I was going to mention that this is my job," he said, "but that would be inaccurate." She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached into the transit case and produced a small container, same material, smaller, sealed with something he couldn't identify. "This is the drink from the 6th night," she said. "There is enough left for," she calculated, 11 human servings, if you use the same measure. He took it. "The 6th night is the night called what was loved," he said. Not a question. He'd remembered. He'd been thinking about the structure of it for days. "Yes," she said. "Thank you," he said. She made no move to go. "Vel," he said. "Yes." I'll be on Verathul for another 8 months, and then I'll probably rotate to a different posting somewhere in the outer spiral arm, and you'll be home and things will be, he stopped. Things will be what they are, but I want to say something before you go. She waited. You told me you weren't sure at first about staying in the observation deck that first night, whether it was all right, whether I would receive it correctly. He looked at her. I want you to know that whatever I received across those nights, it was one of the best things I've received in 4 months on this station. Or longer, maybe. He paused. You and your sister came to watch the stars and you let a stranger sit with you. And that's a gift that doesn't have a clean translation. But it was real. Vel looked at him for a moment. We were not sure, she said, at first, then we were sure. What changed? He asked. You were quiet, she said, in the correct way. An echo, the first thing she had said to him, returned. You received what was present in the room. That is rarer than you may know, Declan Marsh, across many species. She made the stillness gesture. He held still. She picked up her case and walked across the platform. He watched the ship disengage from the docking cradle. He watched it move through the station's outer perimeter, catch its heading, and accelerate into the outer spiral arm with the efficiency of something that had somewhere to be. He stood there until it was a point of light he couldn't distinguish from the stars. Then he went back to the observation deck. He sat down. He put the sealed container on the bench beside him. He looked at the stellar formation that was drifting slowly out of the observation window's frame. He held still. The universe was a very large place, and it was also very small, depending on the moment, and this was both kinds simultaneously. He looked at the stars for a long time. He thought about what it meant to be a liaison officer, what the job actually was, underneath the language of the designation. He'd been given a briefing document when he took the posting, full of professional language about cross-species integration protocols and cultural sensitivity frameworks and observation methodology. And he'd read it with the thoroughness he applied to everything, and had understood it with his professional brain, which was a competent and useful thing. But what the job actually was, he understood now, was this. You went somewhere that was not built for you, and you learned the shape of it, and you tried to be the kind of presence that didn't require anyone else to carry the weight of you. You tried to receive what was there on its own terms before you tried to name it. You showed up at the observation deck at the third watch, and you held still when people needed you to hold still, and you said yes when people asked if there was room. That was all. It was more than it sounded like. He sat on the bench in the observation deck, and he held the container of stone and drain drink in both hands, and he looked at the stellar formation that Sale and Vel had watched for 7 nights, the one their people's oldest narrative said they had come from, which was also, at this distance, just a scatter of light among other lights, indistinguishable unless you knew what you were looking at. He was looking at it. He would file his weekly activity report tomorrow. Under significant interspecies contacts, he would write something brief and factual and entirely inadequate to the thing it described. That was what reports were for, the record, not the experience. The experience would not go into any official document. It would go somewhere else, the place in a person where the things that changed them went to work on them at a pace that had nothing to do with filing deadlines. At some point, he picked up the container and held it without opening it, and the outer spiral arm went on doing what it had always done, which was exist in its particular incomprehensible magnificence, entirely indifferent and entirely present, the way all great things are. He sat there until the watch cycle returned to morning. When the daylight came up and the station returned to the sounds of its ordinary self, the ventilation cycling to a higher rate, the distant harmonics of the Mallow-Drift population at their junction node, the subtle shift in the gravity plating that always accompanied a change of watch, he stood. He put the container in his pocket, next to his chronometer. He thought about Velle's last words in his language, her accent, his words. Already missing it. He thought about his mother, standing at a kitchen window 6 weeks before she died, holding a cold cup, looking at nothing that could be seen from the outside. He understood now what she had been looking at. She had been looking at exactly this. The thing that was present and ending simultaneously. The thing that was both large and precise. The thing that was worth sitting with in the dark, even when sitting with it meant holding something you could not keep. She had been looking at all of it clearly, and she had chosen to look at it clearly. He was her son in more ways than he'd known before this posting. He put his hands in his pockets. He walked out of the observation deck and down the corridor toward the liaison office, where the weekly activity report was waiting and the communal meal hall would be cycling to the morning rotation, and 41 species plus 1 human were going about the business of being alive in the outer spiral arm. He was the only human on the station. He would be the only human for another 8 months, by which point he would know the station in a way that had no official designation, but that he would carry forward with him to whatever came next, the way you carry forward the things you were allowed to hold for a while, not as weight, not as loss, but as the shape of what you learned about yourself when you were alone far from home and something extraordinary chose to sit with you anyway. He was already, in the present tense, missing it. He reported for duty.